G'day everyone and welcome back to this Share Cafe Hidden Gems webinar. Before we make a start, there's a bit of market news we thought we'd discuss. And of course, it's all about inflation with the Consumer Price Index, the measure of inflation, overnight jumping to a 40-year high. Now that takes us back to 1982, well before my time. So personally, I don't have a lot of investment experience in a higher inflation, rising rate environment. So I've done a little research. Now, if you go back to the 80s, CPI averaged around 5.5% versus 1.8% over the last decade here. Now, despite comparing CPI numbers today with what happened 40 years ago, it's not a great comparison as an investment environment. In 1982, it's actually when interest rates peaked in the US. I'm talking about US numbers here. Interest rates were around 8.5% in the US in 1982, and they haven't been that high since. And markets actually rallied all through the 80s, producing a return of around 13.5%, an annual return over the S&P 500. That's despite the 87 crash. And this, of course, was in a falling interest rate environment. So if we want to compare, it's really the 70s, which is really the investment environment we need to compare as rates went up. From negative territory in 1975 to that 1982 peak of 8.5%, and the CPI actually averaged 7.4%. And so with the first signs of rising rates moving higher in the 70s, markets became really volatile. You saw some 30% swings year to year. And during this decade, we saw considerably lower average return of around 5.7% for the S&P 500. Now, of course, looking at the data today, our CPI data, for example, all the data we see at the moment has been distorted by COVID and the resulting supply chain inflation. So whilst we can expect a lower return environment in the future, we may need to look through some of that data as it's COVID related. The real point of concern, we think, will be smaller companies that require cash to keep funding their business models, particularly as we head into a risk-off environment. It will be a stock pickers market, we think, moving forward, and that's why these webinars are so important. So don't forget to ask questions. We know the CEOs appreciate it. Let's make a start. First up, we have Island Pharmaceuticals, ASX code ILA, market cap around $22 million, new to the market. The company is a drug research and repurposing company focused on developing preventative or therapeutic drugs for viral infections. We have with us David Foster, who's the CEO, coming from Dallas, did you say, David?
Exactly right, yes.
Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here today to tell all of you about Island Pharmaceuticals. If we can jump 2 slides ahead, please. So I'm David Foster, the CEO of Island Pharmaceuticals. Island is a mid-clinical stage drug development company. We're focused on repurposing strategies, and I'll explain what that means as we go throughout the talk. We're also focused on antiviral drug development. So we had an IPO last April. We went public, raising $7.5 million Aussie. The good news about that is that that's enough money to allow us to complete our phase 2 clinical trial that we're moving forward with right now. As I mentioned, we're a repurposing company, and what that means is we look for molecules that have a clinical history in one indication, a good safety profile, and then we rely on that data to move forward with a different indication. Our lead indication, as we've discussed, is mosquito-borne viruses. Our lead indication is dengue virus infection, and we have a lead program called ESLO 101. Next slide, please. So the reason we like repurposing is to get a drug developed from start to finish typically takes about 10 to 15 years. It takes about $2 billion US, and that's not what we want to do. Rather, as I mentioned, we want to focus on molecules that have a clinical history, a good safety profile, and then rely on that data to develop that drug for a different indication. Our drug, as it turns out, was initially developed as a cancer therapeutic. Years have been spent on this drug, millions and millions of dollars have been spent, but it's never been approved for anything. It has a great safety profile. It hasn't been proven to be an effective drug for other things yet. So we want to focus on the bottom right-hand side of this slide, drug repurposing, where we can eliminate the first 2/3 of this pathway and save literally hundreds of millions of dollars. Next slide, please. And the next. So what we're focused on is dengue infections. And why dengue? Dengue is a worldwide significant problem. Literally half the world's population is at risk of infection from dengue. Dengue symptoms range from flu-like symptoms, malaise, to upon second and subsequent infections, you can have dengue hemorrhagic fever. It can result in death. And there are no effective therapies. There are limited effective vaccines, and they have very narrow labels where they've been approved. So there's a significant opportunity for an orally available small molecule that might prevent or treat dengue infections. And ISLA 101 shows those characteristics preclinically. Next slide, please. So what we're also observing right now is, and we've spoken to people in endemic regions, these would be regions such as India, think of Latin America where there's endemic dengue. And what people tell us is we're fighting two pandemics simultaneously. We're fighting COVID-19 and we're fighting dengue infections. And it's a significant problem with the people, with the hospitals are being overrun. And again, there's just no effective therapy. Next slide. So this I thought was very interesting. This is a map showing the hotspots of dengue infection today. And as you can see, as you go from blue through yellow up to red, the incidence of dengue infection increases. So if you look at India, significant hotspot. If you look at Latin America, significant hotspot. These countries are really on fire right now with the dengue infection. But if you look at Australia, there's some regions where we have dengue infections, likewise in the United States. But on the next slide, I'll show you what it's predicted to look like in 2050. This is just 28 years from now. Now look at Australia. The northern third of Australia is predicted to be a dengue hotspot. Likewise, if you look at the United States, the southeast section of the United States also predicted to be a dengue hotspot. So it's a significant concern today. It's a growing concern. And as we'll see on the next slide, there's really no effective therapy. The numbers of infections are staggering. Hundreds of millions of people are afflicted every year with infections with these mosquito-borne viruses. The vaccines are limited. I mentioned there are some approved vaccines, but they're limited availability. Some have very narrow labels. So we think that there's a significant opportunity for a molecule, as I mentioned, an orally available small molecule that had characteristics of being able to prevent and or treat a dengue infection. Next slide, please. And the next. So let me tell you about ISLA 101, our lead molecule. I mentioned that it was initially developed as a cancer therapeutic, but it's never been approved for anything. However, based on work out of Monash University in Melbourne, Professor David Jan's lab, Professor Jans recognized that ISLA 101 was a very effective inhibitor of dengue infections in cell culture. In fact, it was effective at inhibiting infection with all 4 strains of dengue, as well as Zika and West Nile and yellow fever. Professor Jans went on to demonstrate that if you took freshly isolated human cells and tried to infect them with dengue in the presence of ISLA 101, you could block that infection. So we now have freshly isolated human cells, which are pretty close approximation to humans. We also have animal data with a lethal dengue model, as well as a Zika model where ISLA 101 is protective. With the clinical history of ISLA 101, the safety data of ISLA 101 in hand, with these preclinical data in hand, we went to the FDA and asked, can we begin a phase 2 clinical trial in dengue infected individuals, bypassing a phase 1, going straight to a phase 2 study? And the FDA said, yes, we can. So on the next slide, we'll talk about what those clinical trials are going to look like. Before we get into the clinical study, though, however, I want to tell you what we've been working on over the last several months. We've been working on our investigational new drug application, an IND. You have to file an IND and get an IND approved by the FDA before you can begin clinical trials. And an IND it's a big document. It is the compilation of lots of pieces of data. And we have many groups working on assembling this IND, and we're getting very, very close. I'm not going to go through all of the information on the slide, but suffice it to say, there are many, many pieces to this puzzle, and we're very close. One of the key pieces is getting your drug made. That's a 2-step process. The first, you have to get your active pharmaceutical ingredient, your API. Then you have to formulate that into the material that's going to be used in clinical trial. We've recently obtained our API. It is literally being shipped to our drug product manufacturer right now. So we're very excited that we're moving down this path. On the next slide, we'll see what that means for the people who are putting this program together. We've recently hired Teresa Byrne. Teresa is our VP of Clinical Operations. We're very excited to have her on board. She has years of experience running clinical trials, international clinical trials. Likewise, we're working with Larry Norder. Larry is our manufacturing expert who is really spearheading the effort to get the drug made. The clinical trial is going to be run at SUNY Upstate in Syracuse, New York. The reason for that is it's the only place you can run this study. SUNY is working on the protocol. We've engaged Camargo to work on our investigational new drug application. They're drafting it and they're in completion with that now. We've recently engaged ICON, which is the CRO that's going to oversee the clinical trial. So I think you can see we're making significant progress. We're getting close. On the next slide, we'll look at some timing and when we think we're going to be getting there. So we need to finish the manufacturing of the clinical product. We need to finalize the manufacturing section of the IND. So once the clinical product is made, we'll drop those data into the IND, finishing that last puzzle piece. We'll file the IND, and then there's a mandatory 30-day review period at the FDA. And if we don't hear from the FDA, then we can start the clinical trial. So again, we're moving down the path. Next slide, please. The clinical study, I do want to spend a few minutes or maybe a minute telling you about this clinical trial. It's incredibly exciting. What we're doing is a challenge study. And what this means is we enroll healthy individuals and then we infect them with an attenuated or weakened strain of the dengue virus. They're very powerful clinical trials. You may have heard about them. There's been conversations about these in the context of COVID-19, for instance. Notably, we're working with Walter Reed, the Army Medical Hospital in the United States, and Walter Reed recently completed a phase 1 clinical trial with the virus that we're going to use in our study. And we can tell you that what happens is people get a little bit sick, they feel a little bad, they have clinical dengue. We can measure symptoms associated with the infection, but they don't get too sick. It makes it for a very nice model to do a well-controlled clinical trial in a hospital setting. What we're going to do is a prophylactic study. So again, enroll healthy individuals, pre-treat them with ISLA 101, then infect them, and continue treating them for the next 20 days, as we've shown on this timeline. And then we want to see if we can reduce the infection compared to the control individuals. The control data is going to come from the Walter Reed study I just told you about. So we have a cooperative research and development agreement in place with Walter Reed. Under that, they're giving us all of the data out of their study. So it's an incredibly valuable piece of data. It saves us tremendous amount of time and money in our enrollment. We don't have to enroll nearly as many people as we would have otherwise. So we like partnering with Walter Reed on the study. Next slide, please. So the commercial opportunity, there's several ways we can go with this. It's pretty clear that we think there's going to be an opportunity for travelers, for the military, for people being sent into or traveling to endemic regions. We think it's going to look like the anti-malaria market, which is anticipated to be about $1 billion market here in just a few years. We also think that there may be opportunities to support national outbreaks, for instance, in government stockpiles. I've mentioned we've been speaking with people in endemic regions, and I think that there may be a real opportunity there. The final opportunity is what's called a priority review voucher. And this is the priority review voucher program is an incentive program created by the FDA in the US. And what it does is it incentivizes companies to develop drugs for underserved diseases. And the way it works is if you get your drug first approved for a disease that's on the list of diseases for which you can get a PRV, then you get the voucher. The voucher enables you to get expedited review of another program at the FDA. So you get your drug approved. If you check all the boxes, then you get this voucher, and the vouchers can be sold. They typically have been selling recently, and the last 10 sold for just north of an average of about $100 million. Just a few hours ago, there was an announcement that a company recently sold their PRV. They sold it for $110 million. So we view this as icing on the cake. It's not what we're focused on. We want to get the drug approved and get it into people to try to help people. We should check the boxes. We do check the boxes today to get a PRV. Zika, dengue, and chikungunya are on the list of diseases for which you can get one. So again, we view it as icing on the cake. Next slide, please. The team that we've assembled is second to none. The board is fantastic. Dr. Paul McClayman, significant experience running clinical trials and getting drugs approved, running companies all across the world. Anna Lavelle, Al Hansen, David Brooks, all fantastic board members. And our scientific advisory board is just second to none. All of these gentlemen have significant experience developing drugs. Next slide, please. This is a highlight of some of the benchmarks we've achieved to date and what we plan to achieve over the next year. I've spoken to most of this right now, so I'm going to pause and I will go ahead and take questions if you want to go to the next slide, please. Thank you.
Thank you, David. We'll wait as that next slide comes up. Just a question. You've only recently been listed, obviously, and there's a substantial investor notice from Jason Carroll, who's kind of increased his stake from kind of 5 to 10%. Can you give us a little bit of his background?
Well, without going into too much detail of his background, Jason is, we've spoken with him, we speak to him whenever he wants, quite frankly. And just, he's a friend of the company. He is very interested in what we're doing. He's obviously very, very supportive. And so we're grateful for all of his support.
Understood. He's clearly a fan. Now, when you were presenting, the Gates Foundation kind of sprung to mind, given their work. I think it's in malaria. Are they someone you can work with, or do you kind of continue to go down this kind of FDA support route and get that voucher? Yeah,
so the Gates Foundation is doing phenomenal work. They have done a lot of work with malaria. They're doing a lot of work looking at mosquito control. And so they're doing fantastic work. We have not spoken to them yet. They haven't seemed to have been really focused on dengue as a disease. And so we have taken a different approach, and that is, let's get this drug approved, get it into the clinic, get it approved, and move towards commercialization that way.
And the appeal was dengue was the fact that it is, it spreads globally and is such large in terms of the number of people it affects.
Yeah. So with ESA 101, we had some optionality, right? We had a lot of data with dengue, Zika, West Nile, yellow fever, all of which are very bad, serious mosquito-borne viruses. But the number of people infected with dengue every year is literally orders of magnitude higher than these other viruses. It's just a significant worldwide problem. So that's where the real need is. It's a bigger market. And there's, obviously commercial opportunities associated with that, but it's the biggest problem.
And moving forward, is the kind of repurposing strategy to find different drugs for different diseases?
That's exactly right. So we've recently entered into, I didn't get to talk about it in this presentation. We've entered into 2 research collaboration agreements, one with Monash University, one with Griffith University. The idea there would be using technology specific to each of the universities, looking at repurposed molecules, for instance, screening libraries of molecules with clinical history against different viruses, not necessarily mosquito-borne viruses. We want to look at other viruses that are relevant to the human condition and look to repurpose molecules to rapidly get into phase 2 clinical trials.
Great, David. That's all we have time for. We'd love to get you back on again and follow your progress over the next 12 months or so.
Fantastic. Yeah, I'd love to be back. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you. Next up, we have Radiopharm Theranostics, ASX code RAD, market cap of 83 million. Doesn't have a 1-year return, newly listed. The company has the ambition to become a leader in the development of radiopharmaceutical products for both diagnostic and therapeutic uses in areas of high unmet medical needs. We have with us Riccardo Canevari, who's the Managing Director and CEO. Riccardo, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim, for having me at your program. So we can skip the next 2 slides of disclaimer. So great to be here. I'm the CEO and Managing Director of Radiopharm Theranostics. I recently created a startup with the focus in radiopharmaceutical. But let's start from the big picture. So in the last 10, 20 years, there has been significant progresses in oncology. But unfortunately, the unmet medical need remain high. In particular, in some disease area, prognosis is still very poor and the unmet needs are significant. Next, please. So we are aware of the more common approach to treat oncology and to try to have positive results. Chemotherapy and targeted therapy are more the traditional approach. More recently, immuno-oncology is playing a significant role, and kind of a new approach is cell and gene therapy. All this together is a huge market, about $290 billion worldwide. But what is happening now, there is an emerging pillar of radiopharmaceutical therapies that is going to play a very important role. And the source of business of radiopharmaceutical is going to be either to be used instead of one of the other modalities that you can see in the slide, or to be used in combination. Next. So, but what are radiopharmaceuticals? So they are based on a very simple concept. You see the tumor and you treat the tumor. What does it mean? You need to have a protein or a monoclonal antibody that specifically bind the tumor cells. And this is very important, a super targeted therapy. And then what you do, you load your peptide or monoclonal antibody with a imaging isotope, a low energy isotope. So the drug goes in the patient body and is able to be uploaded in the tumor cells. So you can see where the tumor is, not only the big tumors, but also the small metastases. When you see where the tumor is, you take exactly the same product, you change isotope. So you switch to a high energy isotope and you inject the drug in the patient. The drug goes exactly in the same place, so where the tumor is, but this time is able to release high energy. And the result of this is disruption of the tumor DNA in the cancer cells. Next slide. So it seems simple to describe, but of course it's very high technology, and this is the reason why it's a lot of interest in the space is coming in the recent period. Personally, I was in Novartis when we decided in 2018 to make 2 acquisitions for a total of 6 billion in the space with AAA and Endocyte. And more companies decide to enter this space that looks very, very promising. Next. So what is the role of Radiopharm Theranostics? We are a new biotech startup. Just 1 year ago, we were born February 2021 here in Australia. The founder is a very well-known entrepreneur, Paul Hopper. He is behind successful biotech listed in the ASX, like Imugene, for example, and we are his last creation. So we raised 20 million Australian dollar in July, 50 million at IPO in November. So very fast from creation to IPO. And we have a big ambition. We have the ambition to become a leader in fighting cancer through the innovative radiopharmaceutical therapies in area of high unmet medical need. Next, please. So this is the team. I already introduced myself. I spent almost 20 years in Novartis. In my last role, I was leading the radiopharmaceutical division of the company as Chief Commercial Officer, and I'm very happy and pleased to be here, of course, in this new journey. We have very talented people in the team. Professor Mosley was Professor of Nuclear Medicine at Cornell University in New York City. Tom Tulip, huge experience in manufacturing and supply chain. And of course, our chairman and founder, Paul Hopper, that I already mentioned before. Next. So what is our business model? We were born during the pandemic. So, you know, we took advantage of it. We decided to have very minimal structural cost, no corporate office, no manufacturing facility, no internal R&D. We are a very small team, 6 employees and 6 part-time consultants, but a very strong network of stakeholders and partners. And the reason we want to put all our investment, all the money we raise, really to accelerate the clinical development of our program. Next. And our focus is really to what is our pipeline. We have 4 unique assets. Peptide, small monoclonal antibody, large monoclonal antibody, and 3 out of 4 of our assets has multi-indication potential. That's why you can see that we can play a significant role in terms of potential in 8 different disease areas in oncology. Area of large prevalence like breast cancer, lung cancer, prostate cancer, but also areas where the prevalence is smaller, but the unmet medical need is very high, like glioblastoma or prostate cancer. We have ongoing trials. We are already in human with our imaging agent, and we have a strong plan for the remaining part of 2022. So we plan to start 5 new trials in the remaining month of the year. And what is important, the focus of our company is to learn from the imaging agent, but really to develop the therapeutic solution. And that's the plan, to start 3 new therapeutic trials in the next months, in breast cancer, lung cancer, and in prostate cancer. And we use different isotopes with different characteristics because we really believe that the combination of the right isotope with the right molecule in the right disease area is the potentially right solution for many cancer patients. Next. Not only 2022, but looking at 2023, the plan is equally ambitious. So we want to add to the 3 therapeutic trials that we are starting in this month, 5 additional trials next year. If we are able to do that, and we have enough resources to start all of this, we believe that we are building the deepest pipeline in the radiopharmaceutical sector. So we are very excited to what we have in front of us and what is already happening. Next. This is another way to see our pipeline. Is the more traditional by phase. You see the more advanced are the imaging, already phase 1 and phase 2, and 1 step behind, like is normal in this sector of the radiopharmaceutical therapy, you have the therapy. But really, for technology, very differentiated, unique mechanism of action, and the potential to be either first to market or best in class. Next, please. So, in summary, we are in a fast-growing and very high potential market with one of the deepest pipeline. Radiopharmaceutical therapy represents a new pillar in a $290 billion oncology market. Radiopharmaceutical therapy has untapped potential in area of high unmet medical need. There is a lot of interest from big pharma and mid-sized pharma to enter this segment through acquisition and MOA. And in this market, what is the role of Radiopharm Theranostics? We are building that we already have one of the deepest pipeline to our breadth of indication and depth of isotope and technology. We are already in more than 150 patients with our technologies. We maintain an opportunistic business development approach, open to in-license new technology if we find the right one. And of course, the most important element is the ambition to improve outcome for patients living with oncological disease. And with this, I thank you for your attention, and back to you, Tim.
Thank you, Riccardo. I know you're in the States there and appreciate your time. Bang on time, 10 minutes, thank you. We had Telix on our webinar a couple of weeks ago, and there's a question here. How does your approach differ from what Telix has?
Yes, so first of all, we need to recognize that Telix is doing a great job. They are a successful company, able to really grow from the beginning to what they are now. They have good technology, and I really believe that they are doing a good job that is going to help the entire sector. As I mentioned before, we are a $290 billion oncology market. The radiopharmaceutical is still a small one, but has huge potential to grow. So we believe that company more company present in the radiopharmaceutical space, more company will help to, train, help physicians to understand these new modalities, support hospital and clinics to have this approach. And what is unique about us? What we have different from other radiopharmaceutical company, we have very different modalities. We have peptide, small monoclonal antibody, large monoclonal antibody, and also we have different isotope. We really go from alpha and beta isotope, and the combination of the right isotope with our molecule, we believe can be unique. We selected our pipeline based on the potential to be first to market or best in class. We decided not to go in areas that are me too, and so we believe we are unique in this space.
There's a very technical question that I'll allow you to answer online in a moment, if you don't mind. There's a question here. What is your current cash burn rate? You've raised 70 million this year. How do you anticipate that capital will be used over the next 12 months?
Yeah, as I showed at the beginning, we are a company that wants to be very lean in terms of internal expenses and put all the money in the clinical development. We made our analysis of our cash flow, and we have enough investment to start not only the 3 new trials that I mentioned before in 2022, but also to start the trial in 2023. So we are confident that we have enough cash to start all this operation and to bring the company to the next step.
Now, it's a big drama, it's a big pipeline. You've kind of got 7 studies on the go. What should investors be focusing on the short to medium terms in terms of catalysts for the share price?
Yeah, so we have some trials that are going to read out in the near future. For example, our phase 2 trial in brain metastasis with Pivalate is going to read out June this year. This is an important moment, but even more important for us is to look at the future and the potential. So our ability to start the therapeutic clinical trials in the time frame that I mentioned before, so around summer this year, and before end of the year, have 3 new therapeutic trials and start the other next year, are really what will make this different for the future.
Riccardo, that's all we have time for. Really appreciate your time, particularly it's a little bit later there in the States. Nice to have you back on again at some stage.
Thank you very much.
Have a nice weekend. Next up, we have Trig Mining. We welcome back Trig Mining. Market cap around 10 million. The company is exploring for the essential potassium mineral fertilizer, sulfate of potash or potassium sulfate, which provides necessary nutrients for agricultural production and human nutrition. We welcome back the Managing Director and CEO, Keren Paterson. Keren, over to you. Just waiting for Keren to come on. Here she is. Keren, can you hear us?
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Thanks for having us on Share Cafe's Hidden Gems. Well, Trig Mining, like the other companies you've heard this morning, is a fairly new kid on the ASX. We listed 2.5 years ago, but the founding principle years before that was about building natural resource projects communities can be proud of. And I'm here to talk about the discovery that we've made and the project that we really are going to be very proud of for not only the shareholders and stakeholders of Trigg, but this is a substantial project and potential new industry as well for Australia. So next 2 slides are our disclosures and disclaimers. And then I'll just quickly give you a background to the corporate structure. So as I said, we listed 2.5 years ago. We have a market cap at the moment of about $9 million. And today we just announced an oversubscribed rights issue of $4 million. And in January, we received $1 million in R&D rebate, which takes our cash balance to approximately $7 million, which is really surprising given what I'm about to talk about and the scale of what I'm talking about with an enterprise value of $7 million. We've got a board and management team that's well equipped to develop this project. And I'm really excited to start talking about the scoping study. Next slide. So like Thruste, I'm talking about sulfate of potash. As Tim said, It's a really essential fertiliser for global food security and also for carbon farming. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But where are the projects? We're in Western Australia. I grew up here. I went to university in Calgary, so this is my backyard. The projects are about 170 kilometres east of Laverton, and they sit on the Great Central Road, in particular Lake Thruste, which is our flagship project and the really big discovery I'm talking about mostly today. That road is being upgraded to become the Outback Highway, which is becoming increasingly important for reliable logistics across Australia. As we've just heard in the last few weeks, there's been a flood event across Central Australia that's taken out the railway and the highways, and that will be a really important trade route, and that goes right past our mine gate. We also have access to rail there down at Leonora and access to ports and external markets, international markets as well as local markets through that. So at the moment we have a total drainable mineral resource of 14.4 million tonnes, but I know that doesn't mean much at this stage because there's not a lot to benchmark against, but it really is a substantial scale project. It's also high grade, and we've updated the resource last year. So I'll just reflect that, in fact, we announced this maiden resource in May last year. So all this is happening very, very fast. We've drilled now the first 36 kilometres, and the rest of the tenure in the project was recently granted in January, which takes the strike length up to 70 kilometres. Next slide. So the scoping study, and what I'm really excited to talk about is those results. Like this 245,000 tonne per annum project is large scale. In fact, it puts us in the top 10 global producers. It has an initial mine life of 21 years for a capex of 378 and gives us a cash cost of about 341 Australian dollars, but 249 US dollars a tonne, which gives us a really substantial margin. Our scoping study was based on an SOP price of 550 US dollars a tonne, but I'll also talk about in this presentation just what's been happening in the fertiliser price market, and we can see the impact of what that will have on the NPV. Next slide. So Lake Thruste, as I said, this is a global scale discovery in the last year. It is a top 10 potential producer and also lowest cost quartile. And with that initial mine life of 21 years, it's depleting 44% of the total drainable resource. That's potential for this to expand as we continue to expand the exploration. Next slide. It's also incredibly important, not just because Australia imports all of its potassium. We need it for our agricultural output. We are talking here in Western Australia of record grain exports, but for example, 5% of the wheat grain that we export is potassium. So we really do need to be continuing to put good quality fertilisers back into our soils to enrich them. This, from a mining perspective, is about harvesting naturally occurring potassium-rich brine. So it's taking what is drainable from the resource, which is still active. So it's draining the very big drainage systems of the desert, concentrating it in the evaporation system of the salt lakes and the patio valleys. And we're looking at taking what is drainable from that. So there's no large open pit. There's no rock waste dump. So overall, we'll have a light environmental footprint with this project that can be rehabilitated as well when mine closure comes. It's about harvesting solar energy, so pumping water out of the ground, evaporating the water, concentrating the salts and taking it, all those salts, so they're electrolyte salts, all the way through to sulphate of potash or potassium sulphate. So it's a natural product and it will have low greenhouse gas emissions. Currently at the scoping study stage, we're talking about 0.17 tonnes per CO2 equivalent per tonne of product, and we're looking at ways to reduce that even further in the pre-feasibility study. From an agricultural perspective, this is where it really has great impact because it can have a really positive effect on carbon farming outcomes by substituting the current muriate of potash, potassium chloride. It eliminates the chloride, which is poisonous for soils and waterways, so it will increase the health of soils and waterways. Drought tolerance. The potassium and the sulphur are incredibly important for the plants, for their tolerance to drought, as well as frost resistance. So it gives you a more robust agricultural output. And it is quality of produce too. Potassium is what makes things taste really great. So it increases the nutritional benefit of the food that we're eating. Socially, we've got a long life project out there. We're on Nuttinjara lands. There's high unemployment. And one of the great opportunities we have is through that time, employing local people for the 114 site-based roles. It's a long life project, so state and federal taxes feed into this as well, native title and state royalty payments. So it's a whole of community project. There's potential for sustained community programs as well with that life of mine. And our mine closure planning is happening right now as well. The company was founded by me, and 50% of our board and senior leadership team are women. And from a governance perspective, we've treated this from the very beginning as an ASX-listed company and have very strong contemporary corporate policies and risk management frameworks. So we really are building mines communities can be proud of. Next slide. So Lake Thruste is an area of just over 1,000 square kilometres now with the grant of the additional tenements. We've drilled on that central tenement, which is E383065. We have a resource of 14.4 million tonnes and additional exploration targets. So this is not the end of the story yet. There's a lot more work to do. And we're very excited that that $7 million in the bank is going to give us a great opportunity to really do a huge amount of work in this field season that's coming up. And that's all about increasing that confidence in the resource, expanding the resource information as well, starting on doing the evaporation trials for the pre-feasibility study and really moving forward on that pre-feasibility study for this project. Next slide. At Lake Yeo, which is really interesting addition to our tenure in recent times, is an interpreted continuation of the Paleo Valley from Lake Thruste, where there's regional information that suggests that it does a bit of a U-turn and swings back into Lake Yeo. So, and also the radiometric potassium information, as well as the astagypsum index, both indicate to us that it could well be another repeat of Lake Thruste. So we really have only scratched the surface exploration-wise on what we're doing out there. And we're already talking about a mine with a 21-year mine life and top 10 global production. So watch this space for all the exploration that's yet to come this year. Next slide. So as I talked about, some things are happening in the fertiliser space. Traditionally, we've really seen SOP being quite a sustained $500 to $550 a tonne for many, many years. And it's trading at a premium over Muriate because there's this secondary process that creates a price floor called Mannheim, where they buy Muriate, add sulfuric acid and heat it to about 800 degrees to then manufacture sulfate of potash. So it's an environmentally taxing process. It's also very expensive. So SOP has a price floor. But with the price changes and the global impact and supply shortages, we're seeing increased demand because we're seeing increased commodity prices. We're also seeing a bit of global uncertainty and also domestic policies around prevention of export. So the global market around fertiliser is really expanding, and that's having a big impact on the price of SOP. And in fact, our scoping study, when we published it, we used $550 a tonne. But for every 10% increase in that, we have a $144 million impact on our MPV. And you can see where the price is going at the moment. The next slide. This reinforces it over, and sorry, the font looks a little bit small today on that, but what this slide is showing is just the impact of what is happening across agricultural commodities. So we hear a lot about the battery commodities. Lithium, yes, it is absolutely going gangbusters at the moment in the last year, but we're also seeing quite a growth there in nitrogen, muriate of potash, sulfate of potash, and phosphate. That's your key nutrients for plant growth. And we're also seeing those increases in commodity prices as well. So it really is booming in the fertiliser space. Next slide. So to sum up, Lake Thruste is set to become a top 10 global producer and is already sitting in the lowest cost quartile through that natural endowment of solar evaporation to produce a natural product. It has outstanding economics. Oh, can we go back? Thank you. For a multi-decade operation with significant exploration potential at Lake Thruste itself and 35 kilometres to the south at Lake Yeo. It is located in the world-class mining jurisdiction of Western Australia. It is Australian-made premium product for food security. It's a natural potassium fertiliser with low greenhouse gas emissions, suitable for all agriculture, and also for addressing things like carbon farming, where by using sulphate of potash, farmers can increase the root growth on their crop and still produce the food from the surface, but capture that carbon in the soil and address climate change. So we have the pre-feasibility study underway. Offtake discussions are also underway, and it's really exciting year ahead as we really get cracking on all the field work for that pre-feasibility study. Thanks, Tim.
Thanks, Keren. It's come a long way. Congratulations on that oversubscribed rights issue. Maybe we start there. There's 4 million there allocated. Can you target where those funds will go? You kind of spoke big picture, but could you be a bit more targeted?
Yeah, we're going to do the first key part of all of the field work from a resource perspective is to now put in some water bores and pump test the aquifer. So we have the resource there, but we need to increase that confidence to be able to transfer that to an ore reserve in the pre-feasibility study. So that's an important part of it. Prior to that, we anticipate also doing an air core program to further refine the location of the water bores. So that'll add some exploration results. And we've got the evaporation trial underway already. So we'll have results of that coming up when that is complete. And also continuing the environmental approvals for this project. So we started that in April last year, even before we announced the resource, because we had a sense that we had something of real scale, so that we can get ahead of the curve there on the environmental approvals process.
And the pricing chart you showed, I mean, everyone's talking lithium, and you're right, the agricultural products are kind of a bit out of sight. Can you talk through why that kind of pricing of sulphate of potash has gone from a floor to growing very quickly? What's changed in the pricing structure?
So a number of the inputs when it comes to production of SOP as the Mannheim process. So we've seen energy prices rise globally. We've seen the muriate prices rise globally. And part of that is because of things like the disturbance with Russia. There's been sanctions on Belarus, and Belarus is one of the world's larger producers of muriate. So it's becoming increasingly hard to get your hands on both potassium fertilisers globally. Other things where, like China has changed its policies around domestic export. So it's about keeping the product locally so they can use it locally and not export it to the rest of the world. So there's becoming less supply on the global trade.
And is there any, sorry, go on.
I was also going to say, as commodity prices increase as well, farmers feel more relaxed about using fertiliser, understand that they need it, and they want to increase their yields, so they will use more fertiliser as well.
And is there anyone globally, company-wise, that investors can look to that are producing SOP and the market mechanics behind that? Is there somewhere they can look to?
It's quite an opaque space because there are not a lot of public companies that share that type of information. Europe is a large producer of SOP. Compass Minerals in North America would be a similar analogue to what we're looking at doing here in Australia. And the lithium brines as well, even in South America, are a very similar process. The difference, though, for Western Australia is the high evaporation rate. So at Compass Minerals, they have about 1 metre a year. And in Western Australia, we have 3 to 4 metres a year, which accelerates that evaporation for us.
And there's been a few missteps, for want of a better word, in the space in Western Australia. Is there some key learnings from that at the moment?
Oh, absolutely. Like, Trigg has always been about being the second mover, and because this is new, this is entirely new industry. It's a new approach to producing minerals, and we really need to develop that IP within the country, but also within our companies. And what we're doing here at Trigg is watching and learning, and being more efficient with our use of funds as we go. So it's very much about being second mover here for Trigg.
And finally, just one question: what's the kind of project timeline? Can you elaborate a little bit more?
Well, we really want to make sure we do this right. This is a really big project with a long mine life. We're going through all of the study phases, again, learning the lessons, not to cut those corners, make sure that we do the scoping, then the pre-feasibility study and feasibility study. And at this stage, we have a timetable that indicates that we may be in a position to make a final investment decision in 2025.
Keren, thanks for your time. Have a nice weekend, and we'll get you back later in 2022.
Great. Thanks for having me, Tim.
Finally, we have Quantum Graphite, ASX code QGL, market cap of around 72 million. Company hasn't got a 1-year return yet. The company is a producer of flake graphite products, supporting applications from traditional markets to the emerging expanded graphite sectors and the fast-moving energy technology sector. We have with us the Executive Director and Secretary, Sal Catalano. Sal, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon or good morning. Let's start first couple of minutes with that front page. I want to focus on the company's philosophy. It's relevant to certainly the company's direction and the approach we take in the business. This is an industrial minerals company. Its principal resource is graphite. It's not just a graphite company selling graphite concentrate, or indeed providing graphite as some raw or feedstock into some process. This is important for a couple of reasons. Firstly, our focus is not to build a resource or reserves that are 1,000 times annual global demand for natural flake. Okay. We consider this to be a misallocation of shareholders' capital. Secondly, the technical or product development parts of our business and marketing are critical. It's where most of the activity, quite frankly, has been focused. So, an industrial minerals company. Product marketing is very, very important, and this is reflected in a couple of and relevant. We're looking at the company. First is we have a board that is technically very strong, globally recognised people in minerals processing, metallurgy, and global trading. The other thing I'd say by way of introduction is, we're looking at Quantum and comparing other graphite companies. There's no question, we fill a unique spot. Quantum is not here to fill an emerging market dominated by a processing giant. I'm referring to electric vehicles and the processing capability of a number of Chinese companies. That is certainly a market, but the other markets are important to us and represent opportunities for downstream participation. The first is high and refractory, where the company has formed over decades, and the second is thermal energy storage products, which I'll come to. So I thought I'd just start with that to set the scene. Next slide, please. Quantum's tenements include 2 mining leases, 2 retention leases, and a very large exploration lease. If you look at the cutout of the resource map, you will see that the mining leases are in that top orange rectangle. It's quite small. This is clearly a huge ore body that extends some 12 kilometres from Yulee all the way down to Fishery, which is Sleaford Bay. The company is fully permitted. Its project is fully permitted. The company has previously pre-qualified with all the major European and North Asian manufacturers in refractory or high and refractory products. Obviously, we have history in that area, and of course, the other unique feature of the company is its arrangement with Sunlands, which is a leading thermal energy storage technology. This technology is for long duration storage, and I'll talk some more about that later in the presentation. Next slide, please. The Yuli-2 project consists of a pit immediately to the south of the old Yuli-1 pit. This pit has a mine life of approximately 12 years, and that's the first stage only. As you'll see from that drawing, the resource is indicated by the highlighted sections, green and brown. Yuli-2 could easily expand further to the south, the east, and to the west. There are offtake agreements in place at the moment by virtue of its joint venture arrangement with Sunlands, and there'll be more to come on that front over the coming months. The processing path for our products are relatively straightforward, involving a multi-stage polishing process, and I'll come to that in a later slide. Next slide, please. The project technicals and economics are stated here. Crusher feed is 500,000 tonnes, so relatively small. The graphitic carbon grade is almost 12%. The capex required for the project is approximately 80 million. And we deliver at the mine gate a production cost of $368 per tonne. Our current product price, or basket price ex works, is $9.19, so it's quite a healthy margin. But we expect the price to change. Obviously, the price of coarse flake graphite has increased significantly over the last 2 or 3 years. Next, please. Products. Yuli has always produced a high purity coarse flake, well over 96.5% and 97%. The recent work we did with our processing path has proven a product mix as shown in the table. Our medium to coarse and very coarse flake is over 97%, and we expect that to increase slightly in production. The production plan involves a multi-stage polishing process. It's in fact quite similar to what's been adopted elsewhere in the world, and we expect to achieve these results without too many difficulties. This particular product mix is obviously highly suited to the high-end refractory market, expandables, foils, and the thermal storage market. Next, please. This is the overview of extensions to the resource over the coming years. Clearly showed it's a multi-generation project. The short-term extensions to the reserve will occur by extending the Yuli-2 pit to the south, as well as to the east. Next slide, please. The company has a joint venture with Sunlands, which is involved in long-duration energy storage. That joint venture will involve Quantum and Sunlands coming together and manufacturing the actual thermal storage media to be inserted into storage cells that can be used to store thermal energy and ultimately drive steam turbine generators. The market for thermal energy storage is significant. It's projected to grow by many times, probably 8 to 3 times they expect over the next 8 to 10 years. It's a very long-term market, and the revenue streams, particularly in relation to some critical applications, are significant. One thing I should add is that the DFS for Yuli-2 does not include the impact of the joint venture on our financials. Next slide. The joint venture's critical application is the retrofitting of coal-fired power stations. I have some key metrics there which indicate the amount of graphite required for some of these cells. A good rule of thumb is you need 5 tonnes of flake, coarse flake, for a megawatt hour of storage. So you can immediately work it out that a substantial amount of flake is required to be used to retrofit existing coal-fired power stations. That is certainly a target for us. We are working with a number of industry players in that area today. And if any of you follow the electricity market, one of the things you'll clearly see is that the transition from coal-based load to renewables is keeping many people up at night. And we believe that quantum will be a major participant as that transition or transformation evolves. Thank you.
Thanks, Sal. Just a couple of questions here. Can you talk us through your kind of cash position and cash burn and things like that? Everyone in this space always likes to get some background in that regard.
Yeah, cash burn is at this stage driven entirely by our research program. So it's probably approximately a couple of million a year at this stage, maybe a little bit more. Okay. We'll probably go to the market again soon enough, but at this stage, our immediate needs are being met by the arrangements we have in place, including with Chimeric Capital. The R&D program is really critical because we consider that to be where the significant value add will occur, including, of course, in relation to the joint venture.
And so the global flake product that you have, has that been pre-qualified by European and North Asian manufacturers?
Yeah, it has. The previous management pre-qualified it with RHI, Magnesita and so on. We're one of the few that have achieved that, by the way. It's quite an achievement in one sense, but anyone that knows the history of the Uli product will know that it's a product that has been used in Europe over the years in various applications, mainly in refractories, but also other interesting applications.
So is the strategy to kind of get your product pre-qualified with other parties?
Our strategy is to build on our offtakes. Pre-qualification isn't the problem that is for other graphite companies. What we're interested in is building the plant, developing the project, and that means achieving some critical mass in our offtakes. I think once that occurs, we'll go immediately to develop the project. The geochemistry of this flake is quite special in the sense that it's a very clean product, and its processing it doesn't involve any of the complications you would associate with dealing with metals and so on in the ore body.
And given the quality of the product, can you demand a premium for what you're producing?
Yes, we can. The basket price, if you look at prices today, you would expect that our coarse flake, especially the top 50% of our product mix, it could easily be 50 to 60% above our basket price. So that would be conservative. So we would expect that. One thing I should say is that there isn't much coarse flake around at the moment. The Europeans still rely on China. China's coarse flake quantities are very small, and increasingly a lot of the technology in Europe is using a lot of synthetic material to achieve various outcomes. But in relation to foils, expandables, and so on, additional coarse flake in the market is pretty critical.
And how clean is the process for production compared to what's in the market from China, for example?
Yeah, it's chalk and cheese. Most of the market is fines material that sees its way into EV feedstock or into low-end refractories. It really can't do much more than that. This material can be used in applications, especially high-end refractories, which has now become really the domain of the Europeans. can be used there, and it's quite distinctive. At the moment, there's a shortfall there, and one of the challenges that we're facing, and obviously COVID's got in the way, is trying to re-establish the agreements that previous management had put in place prior to it coming off the board.
And that previous management, they had the relationship with Sunland. Can you tell us a little bit more Sunland and how that works? Partnership.
So Sunlands is a company that developed some long duration energy storage business, which means if you're going to transform the grid, basically decarbonise, you need long duration storage. So lithium-ion batteries, electrical batteries, basically all they do is prevent disaster happening, work short term, allow other facilities to come up, and so on. Long duration storage actually is there to promote, reliability and security of the system. And so around the world, there is, I can't even tell you how many, numerous tenders for long duration storage, because unless you can store renewables for significant periods of time, decarbonising will cause, I guess, the sort of problems we're seeing now in Germany, and what you're seeing with Nord Stream 2 really is a fallout of the closure of their coal and nuclear plants in 2019.
Sal, thanks for your time. Love to get you back on later in the year and follow your progress.
Oh, excellent. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone, for sharing your Friday lunchtime with us. We'll be back again next week. See you later.